The past couple of months have been extremely tough for international students, either those in the country or those who are planning to come. So many policy changes, things are happening. I mean, it's been a very interesting time for them. And I think if you're planning to come to Canada, this is a pretty good episode for you because Olu breaks down the things you need to do before you move. But I think the biggest takeaway for me here is be kind to yourself, plan. And immigration is not something you do with desperation. You just gotta plan. You have to plan. Let's get to it. When did you leave Nigeria and why? Like, what was going through your head? Because it feels like you left before Japa was Japa. Like the way you handled yourself, like
way before Canada even became popular. I came to Canada in 2015. First thought of coming to Canada in 2014. And primarily I came to Canada as an international student myself. I came for my master's degree at the University of Saskatchewan, and quite lucky to also get a full funding for the master's and subsequently for my PhD at the university as well. But like rightly said, Japa was not even the thing back then. And I will be honest with you, when I came, my goal was I'm going to get this education, this fancy degree that I can use back home. And the plan was to return back to Nigeria. Honestly, the plan was to return back to Nigeria. I did not even know the permanent residence pathways. I knew back then that you could get a post-graduate work permit after your study. But in terms of like long-term stay, even thinking about the career and all those things, those were not even the things. It wasn't a move of you have to move or, that's the end of things for you kind of thing. And when I came here, why Canada also back then was quite an interesting story. I got to know about Saskatchewan. I went to the University of Saskatchewan, and nobody even goes to Saskatchewan back then. I did not even know how to pronounce Saskatchewan until I got to Canada. And I was just listening to a radio station back home in Nigeria. I was living and working in Ibadan back then. And they brought those people that were always talking about like travel agents. And they were like, oh yeah, Canada is looking for people. They're looking for people to work because of like the labor shortages and all that. Never imagined I could even get a job in Canada from Nigeria. So when I listened to that and they were mentioning the provinces that the populations were not a lot, Saskatchewan came up, New Brunswick, Manitoba and all that. So I said to myself, I'd always had it in mind to go do my master's abroad and all that. So these places where they're looking for people to work, they probably also have like universities where people can do like their master's and PhD and things like that. So I took that information from the radio station, looked up East Saskatchewan and a couple of other provinces, and I saw the University of Saskatchewan. I also found out it's one of like the top rated universities in Canada. It's one of the U15. They do a lot of like research, quality research. They have a lot of funding. And, when I heard about funding back then, I was like, oh, this would make things much more easier. So I went down that rabbit hole of like looking for a program, looking for a supervisor, seeing the funding they had to offer. And it just kind of like clicked with the kind of things I was doing back then. I've been working in like policy from back home, and I was supporting at-risk youth. I was working in government to develop policies and programs for like youth development and all that. Also had a background in sociology and anthropology, and I do more of like the cultural part of the research, community-based engagement and things like that. So when I started looking at coming to Canada, one of the things I found pronounced in like the things in Canada is even how Canada came to be. Indigenous people were like the original settlers in Canada, and there were so many social issues that were, affecting Indigenous people and all that. So I took interest in that, merged that with my background in anthropology and doing cultural research and doing community-based research, and I developed a proposed research back then to kind of like look at the experience of Indigenous people in the criminal justice system in Canada. And I was lucky enough to also get a supervisor that is also an indigenous person. So he was quite, fascinated by the fact that someone from outside Canada had this depth of like knowledge and research about like issues that the indigenous people are facing. And he accepted to supervise me, provided information to get funding. I got a full scholarship back home from Nigeria, which made the journey easier. And then after my master's as well, it was a straight path to also doing a PhD and also getting full funding for the PhD as well. So that was how I found myself in Canada. Didn't even know that, the opportunity could exist to stay back and become a PR. I ended up becoming a PR even before the 2-year master's visa expired. When I got here, just like, one of the things I always say, the first set of people you connect with when you move to a new country, they have a role to play in what you eventually become in that country. And the people I met in Saskatoon back then, the information they had, the things they've done, they were the ones that made me know that, you could actually use your degree from back home and work experience to do the Express Entry program. I always say those of us that came in 2015 are part of IRCC's favorite people because that was the year the Express Entry program started and it wasn't popular. Not so many people knew about it. Not so many people were using it to apply for permanent residence. The cutoff back then were also significantly lower, especially from like 2016 and 2017. So it just kind of like, it made things easier for us to also now be able to use those information and apply for PR and transition from being being an international student to being a permanent resident and started paying local fees and have access to more grants and funding and be able to work full time as a PR. Everything was just happening and it was just too good to be true at that time. And we're like, you know what? It'd be like, say, now it's anywhere you go to that it's your home. And then we're building, network across the country. I was sharing information on social media. A lot of people were finding those information useful. We're building our own community. That's more than 400,000 people combined right now. So things just, it wasn't planned. It wasn't planned. It was just a matter of like being at the right place at the right time and having access to the right information. And we're grateful to God for how far we've come and the things we've been able to do as well.
Yeah, I have a lot of things I want to dig into in this story you told me. But first of all, that thing you said about how things were just happening. I can just imagine if you think about people who have tried to move in the past 3-4 years and how everything is changing so fast. Right. The rules change every single day.
Right.
You had this brilliant thread where you put up things that the government said they were going to do, but they haven't done them yet.
Right.
And I'm just like you said, it just feels like it felt like people who moved 2015 to maybe 2018, 2019, they were balling. Like they balled.
Right. Even in terms of the exchange rates, if you have use your own country currency to fund your stay, let's say you're a Nigerian and all. When I moved here, I think $1 Canadian was probably about 130 naira.
Gosh.
Or 130.
Gosh.
Back then, if I didn't get funding from the University of Saskatchewan, I could have paid out of pocket myself. The tuition at the time for my program was like 5,500 for an entire year.
Damn.
That was less than $1 million naira, if my maths is right. Yeah, it's less than $1 million naira.
Yeah, it is. It is $5,000 by 100.
Yeah. But right now it's about 11,000, and then the exchange rate you're looking at like millions and millions of naira. So things were good then. The population in the country also wasn't a lot back then. In 2018, the number of temporary residents in Canada was less than 500,000. And they used to have this multi-year immigration levels plan where they state like the number of new permanent residents that Canada plans to welcome every year for like the next 3 years.
Yeah.
You find out that the quota was about 500,000 every year back then. And temporary residents are just like less than 500,000. So you could predict and say that was why the cutoff for express entry was very low then. You could predict and say, okay, if I finish my program and, I do my language test, or even before I finish my program, there are lots of us that transition directly to PR before we finished our program back then. But right now, as of a couple of months ago, I think in July or August 2024, the temporary resident population is now about 3 million people. The quota for permanent residents every year is still about 500,000. And then the pressure on infrastructures are getting more pronounced. Housing situation, wait times for doctors. Those issues have always been there, but they were not as pronounced as they are. And then the conversations people are, more people are talking about those things in social media. Election is also around the corner. Politics has its own role to play. But one of the places where it gets really challenging is also in terms of the system of governance we have here. We have 10 provinces and 3 territories. I tell people the way I look at it is that each of those provinces are like mini countries within the larger country called Canada. What is obtainable in Alberta is different from Ontario, is different from Saskatchewan. You also find out that in all industrialized nations of the world, Canada is the only one where we don't have a federal ministry of education. There's no federal education minister in Canada. We have, at the provincial level, we have ministers in provinces for advanced education or skill development and things like that. So provinces are the ones responsible for structuring the educational sector. So they structure it differently in each province. They are also the ones responsible for designated oversight functions over designated learning institutions. It's their own quote and unquote responsibility to manage and say, how is this school doing? How many students are you bringing in? Whereas on the other side, the federal is responsible for immigration and approving visas. You apply to IRCC, they approve visa. They are not bothered about whether there's enough support or infrastructure for the international student, because that's provinces. And we've seen in instances where some schools make more money from international student fees than the grants or the subventions they are getting from the government at the provincial level. So those schools just started making money. You find out in some schools in provinces, I'm not going to mention names, where the international student population in the school grew up to 70% or 80% of all the students in the school. When we came back then, you rarely find international student population to be more than 30% of the entire student population. So things were growing, they were not being managed properly, and Canada was getting so popular, especially after towards the pandemic. After the pandemic 2020, a lot more people were coming. At that time, the express entry program, the draws were also paused. So a lot of people who wanted to get into the country saw the educational route as an alternative to at least be in the country first and then take things forward from there. And then the population was growing. Visas were growing. Temporary foreign workers were growing. International student population, as of the last time I checked, over 1 million international students alone out of all the 10. It's a lot of things. But here we are right now. Now there are more eyes on those growing population. The policies are changing. Things are changing. They're happening every day. One day, new rule. Another day, an updated rule. And, this is just where we find ourselves right now.
I now understand, because I never understood it this way. That piece about IRCC does the visas. Provinces manages the schools.
Right.
And so instantly there's already a valley in between where there's no one. So IRCC, we applied.
Yes.
Schools, these are the applications I have. Give me visas for these kids.
Right.
No one is saying, hey, no one is matching government facilities to school needs. No one is doing all that matching, and which is what you're right about. And I don't know if the answer is Federal Ministry of Education, but maybe it does have a part to play of just managing education needs, stroke population needs, stroke what Ministry of Health has or transportation has. Because you're right. it's not a comfortable conversation to have because people get very personal about it. But the truth is that there's a conversation to be had around the amount of people that are brought into the country and the effect that has itself on every other thing, because everything just goes downstream
from there. That those people that are coming are getting for their money. International students pay 4 or 5 times more than local students as well. You find out that in certain places, even like the educational infrastructures in those institutions are not serving them well. There's a school in Atlantic Canada that they got so many students that there were no lecture rooms for the students anymore. They had to start using a cinema hall in the city where the school is to take lectures for students. Why would I be paying 20,000 Canadian dollars and be taking lecture in a cinema hall? You understand? That's one of the things I advocate for, that these students need to get value for their money. You understand? It's a lot of money to pay. They should get the quality education they were hoping to get when they moved to a country like Canada. And I think, like you said, maybe having a federal Ministry of Education, maybe not, maybe working more, coordinating things, between the federal and the provincial. I think that's one of the reasons why the Minister of Immigration had to step in with the new quota that was announced in January 2024, and now assigning specific quota to each of those provinces based on a lot of research and information that has gone into how many students do you have the capacity to. We never had that. We never had a quota for temporary residents in Canada. We used to have a quota for like new permanent residents to welcome every year. But now with the new multi-year immigration levels plan that will be announced in, I think, November 1, 2024, the minister has also mentioned in one of his announcements that we'll now have a specific quota for even temporary residents. That has never happened. So
it's such a gosh.
It's a lot to unpack.
Yeah.
It's a lot to unpack. Yeah.
But I was going to, and I'm going to poke the bear here.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, we need quality education, but then what about the conversation around students who come and then claim they can pay school fees, but they can't pay the school fees? They're assuming that they're somehow going to get a job and use that to pay school fees. Like, how does that? I don't have any thoughts on it, but just a question I have in my mind is that how does that ladder up to balancing quality education versus, yes, you should be able to pay your school fees and then start asking the country for a job? Because I don't know, it's.
I mean, I think a lot needs to go into both from the institutions and other relevant agencies, also sensitizing people. I talk about this all the time. Now, a lot of people are getting to understand what I meant by it back then. I always say, if you're coming to Canada to study, make sure you have enough to pay at least your first term tuition. In fact, at best, your first year tuition if you're doing more than 1 year program. Either you have the money yourself, or you have the scholarship, or you have things well figured out without having to work in Canada. And have enough money for your living expenses in the first 6 months. Not everybody will be able to do that, but it helps you a lot. You're coming into a new system and things happen so fast here, First day, your classes are already starting. They're already bombarding you with assignments and group work and things like that. You may be too busy to even go and look for a job. Or you may start looking for a job and not get something immediately. And like we say here, the bills don't wait. End of the month, you have to pay rent. You have to pay your phone bill. You have to pay this, you have to pay that. By the end of the first month, schools would expect you to have paid your tuition. So if you're coming in, no scholarship, know that it's going to be very, very difficult. And that's where people now find themselves in situations they never imagined. You understand? So it's a lot of like sensitization, being honest about how things work here. Like I mentioned in my own time, I had the full funding. I just had to bother about where do I find a house? Where do I stay? When I land, who is going to pick me from the airport? Things like that. So it made it easier for me. It also made it very, very possible for me to start looking at what are the other opportunities that are even in this country. If you are very overwhelmed about like, am I going to sleep outside in a minus 40 weather with the landlord chase me? You are not even in that state of mind to even think about other opportunities you can tap into. I always recommend that in this time. And IRCC has always made this clear. And that's part of the reasons why they now even look. I think one of the things they should have done before now is that for the longest time, the living expenses to come and study in Canada as an international student outside of your tuition was 10,000. I've always known it to be 10,000. I had the last time they made a change to that was maybe 2003 or thereabout. They never, and inflation, things are changing across the world. 10,000 right now, if you're going to a place like, let's say, Toronto in Ontario, that's probably 2-3 months of rent for you. Not enough if you have to, except you're sharing the space. But it's also very, very expensive. That 10,000 is not enough. So they only recently did a review of that in December 2023 and changed it to 20,635. And now they said every year they will review that. Those are the things that could have been done every year in the past, so that when that change now happened, it was 100% increase. It felt choking for a lot of people. If we've been increasing that, let's say by like 10 or 20% every year in the last 20 years, it's a better increase and change to manage for a lot of people. But the truth is that, and I say this also all the time, going abroad to study will cost you money. It's an expensive investment. If you are not paying for it directly, someone else is already paying for it. Either you're getting scholarship, either you're doing a research-based program that is highly subsidized because of the research you're coming to do. Either you're getting funding from a supervisor or something. But, and I like one thing the Honorable Minister mentioned a few days ago, that living in Canada is expensive. You need money to do those things. The money we pay for a month of rent here is probably what you pay for a year of rent back home in Nigeria. So if you have to use Naira to fund that, it's a lot of money. It's expensive. Is it a worthy investment? Absolutely. If you plan things well, which is probably some of the things to get into, how people can strategically position themselves, what areas are in demand, what areas do I know that if I do this, to some extent, the opportunities are there. What areas are no longer in demand, that is this going to be a worthy investment for me? I talk about the 3 plans you should have when you're coming here to study. Your study plan. How are you able to show how that is contributing to either showing like a career progression or an academic progression for you? You need that to be able to justify the reason why IRCC should approve your visa. The second plan is your career plan. When you finish this program, what do you want to use this study to do? It helps you to identify whether there are additional skills that are not covered by the program and the study that you need to develop. What are employers looking for when they're looking for employees in that area? How can you better prepare yourself to be what I call job ready? And then lastly, your immigration exit plan. What are your plans? Is it to get your degree and go back home? Do you plan to stay in Canada? What immigration pathways are available for you? Do you have to go to a specific province? In your own profile, is it better for you to, first of all, go to New Brunswick and get your immigration sorted out than going to Ontario? Because again, like I mentioned, 10 provinces in Canada, 3 territories. What they are looking for in Alberta may not be the same as Quebec. So you're like, okay, I'm in this profession, I'm looking towards this direction, this is a program I'm looking for. I'm better off in Alberta, not because I have a friend in Ontario. I never knew anyone in Saskatchewan when I came. It's a lot to talk about.
But that's a really good plan that you lay out. And a lot of people don't think about it that way. Because you should think about it that way.
Yeah. A lot of people don't. We have a community Telegram group of like people doing their applications themselves. We just push information there. more than 80,000 people in the Telegram group right now. And then we see some of the conversations that people have. I'm like,
what are you doing?
What are you doing? What are you doing? So it's a lot to talk about.
I used to tell people that I plan to move to Canada for 2 years.
Yeah.
I planned it for 2 years. For example, work-wise, before I got here, I had done like over 20 to 30 informational interviews. I was talking to people in my profession. Hey, this is who I am. I'm coming in. We planned it for 2 years. We had courses we needed to back in Nigeria. The wife, we planned it.
That's the way it should be.
I'm like, it's not, you don't just, immigration is insanity. That's what I call it. It's insane for you to pack your life into 2 bags and move to a new country. And why would you do it haphazardly? Why would you do that to yourself?
Yeah. I was on a live session a couple of days ago and I said, even the money it costs you to come and study right now, if you do the maths in Naira right now, as of today, as an international student on tuition and living expenses, it's going to cost you close to 40 million naira,
yes,
at least, or more. Why would you be investing 40 million in something that you've not done your thorough research and ask questions and be involved? A lot of people are not even involved. Oh, my agent said, an agent told me. I don't like hearing agent. That's why I coined the word SOJ for them. Because that's one other thing that a lot of people don't know about that immigration in Canada is regulated. Either you're doing your application yourself or you're paying a licensed consultant. And if you're paying a licensed consultant, be involved in the process as well. To put more hand in your pocket and take 40 million out, we've seen instances where people get here, they don't even know like the kind of program they applied to for them. Oh my, an agent did it. We've seen instances where people were returned at the port of entry because the CBSC officer is asking them, okay, where are you going? What arrangement? What program? An agent did it for me. I don't. Because it starts from, that's where I always say when you're coming to Canada, there are 2 or 3 things you should have in mind that they are the lifestyle here. Part of it is doing things yourself. There are so many things you can't just call and say, well, let me pay this person. Then it's going to cost you more money. You have to learn how to do those things yourself. They are the lifestyle. You have to learn how to do research, basic research on things. You heard something from someone, you put 1 + 1 together, you make it 11, not even just 2. You have to learn how to be proactive. Opportunity comes your way, you're proactive about tapping into it. Networking, connecting with people, putting yourself out there, letting people know what you do. This is a very fast-paced environment where you need those things actively to make headway. So if you're coming, you don't even know the school they apply to you, you don't even know.
That person deserves to be deported, I beg. That person deserves to be deported.
A lot of things happen, and then people don't even know the study visa they have from back home is just the travel visa. You get your study permit at the port of entry. That's when they make the final determination and say, are you worthy of getting into Canada or not? And we've seen instances where people send us email and say, the CBSC turned me back. Maybe they're asking them, how do you plan to pay? Oh, an agent used an account for me. I don't even, are you related to your sponsor? You can't say who the sponsor is or how related you are. It's a lot.
I'm trying to be very sensitive here, to be honest, because the thing I want to say, man, if I say it, I'm sure I'll get cancelled. Honestly. Because we need to do better.
Right.
We actually need to do better. I mean, I think for me, even if you just start from the premise of, if you're about to spend 40, 50 million naira on something, why can't you just do better with it?
Do your research. A lot of people are getting it now, though. I think in the past, the absence of information and trustworthy figure that people can get those information for contributed in some ways to this vacuum and all that. But and a lot of people are now also open about both the opportunities, the prospects, and the challenges of immigration right now. I don't think there's any day I won't tweet something that is related to immigration. So a lot of people now get it, and they're doing better. They're getting those right information. They are making good use of it.
I think we'll kind of round up now. And I think I just probably have two questions for you. I think one is, do you have any tips for someone who's looking to move as a student right now? How to just kind of manage, like the policies are changing too fast. Even for me, who I live in the country, like sometimes I'm like, yeah, what's going on? So like tips for managing that, following that, or handling that. Any tips for handling that?
Number one is the choice of program you're coming to Canada to do. Especially if you have long-term plan of staying here for a long time after your study, working in corporate Canada or doing things of your own. The IRCC will release some information in the next couple of weeks on like those in-demand occupations and labor shortages area for the future, maybe for like the next 5-10 years. Make sure you find a way to align yourself to those areas. And it's going to cut across different sectors. That's very, very important. Number one. Number two is also that the finance is a big part of the study abroad process. Do your best to plan ahead. Things happen out of our plan, but at least you can confidently say to yourself, at least I tried, I planned. Nobody planned that the exchange rate will be this high right now. And I understand people in situations like that. You understand? So if there are opportunities you can tap into for funding, part of the things people need to know is that, especially if you already have a first degree, you want to come here for graduate level study, masters, and the likes, you're better off, if you need funding, doing a research-based program. Number one, they are subsidized. The tuition is not a lot. Number two, that's what they fund you for, the research you're coming to do. If you have to tough it out for 1 year, 2 years to do a research-based program that would attract funding for you, consider that as well. Number three is also the choice of the provinces you're going to. There are certain provinces right now that the population is a lot. They are probably even the one that made the eyes of IRCC to open and say, this is a lot of people here. So if there are other provinces, you can do your research and say, what I'm coming here to do is still lucrative and good in this other province. Let me go there first. Look at the annual quota, the distribution of like students across the 10 provinces and all that. Put that into consideration. Lastly, get started early enough. Like you said when you were sharing your own, Canada is not, I wake up on Friday, I want to be here by Monday. Do enough background work, planning, research on those things. Connect with people. People are very open about sharing their experiences and all that. Go on the maybe Facebook, International Student Office, International Student page of the schools you want to go to. Connect with people. Ask about their experiences. Ask them questions on like what they would have done better. The challenges they are facing. You understand? The opportunities existing in those schools. Talk to the International Student Office. Talk to program coordinators. They will share some info. Get as much as possible information as you can before you.
Thank you. I don't know if I should ask another question because like those are this is a good place to end this, honestly. Like it's a good place because I think that's an amazing playbook for someone who's looking to move as a student. Like it's an amazing playbook. Like, it's on point because when you read some of the stories, I just think about like, because even if you get frustrated with the person, you still feel like that's a human being who's struggling for something.
Oh yeah, definitely. And be kind to yourself. That's one thing I always add to people too. A lot of people are frustrated with how things are back home. Remove desperation from your immigration plan. Remove desperation from your immigration plan. Be kind to yourself. These things could get overwhelming sometimes. I always find people to find other things to spark joy for them in the process and leverage those things to make themselves happy. You understand? Don't be desperate, because that's some of the things we also see in our community. Like people, I just want to go. No, don't just go out. There's something that is more frustrated than not being able to Japa. It is to Japa the wrong way. And then you get here, you're like, oh, it's an illusion, and it's things like
that. That Japa the wrong way will mess you up. It will set you back for life.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Olu. Thank you very much. This has been really good.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for getting to this point of the interview. I appreciate it. I really appreciate it. If you know someone who's looking to move as a student who finds this useful, please send this to them. Please send this to them. If you know someone else I can talk to, send them my way. As I always say, follow us, like, subscribe. We're on Substack, we're on YouTube, we're on Instagram, where we share it on LinkedIn. Just follow us, please. Anyway you get your podcast, we're there. Have a beautiful day.